And you write about forgiving yourself in a way that I also thought was very powerful. You seem to have a bit of a, I don't think this is, like out of turn given the book, but you seem to have a bit of a chip on your shoulder for in part because you grew up one of the lone immigrant families in South Carolina in a context where you were very acutely aware of your identity. And this is something that I also can relate to growing up in upstate New York in the 70s as one of the lone Asian families. I had a lot of teasing and some fights. Kids are generally pretty quick to point out differences with other kids. And you write about having to forgive yourself and then also forgiving others and having that actually as something that helped fuel your ability to make positive things happen in the world.
Yeah, I do think that we don't talk about forgiveness in the workplace or of ourselves nearly enough. I mean, for me, I absolutely had a chip on my shoulder. I grew up in a place where people would come up to my parents, adults, not even kids. You'd go back to where you came from. And in my mind, I would think New York, because I'm from New York. I grew up in Queens. And I just remember thinking, how could people actually say that to someone else that they don't even know? And yet, I spent my whole childhood being othered, being that person who ate strange food and, didn't quite fit in and was always, no matter where I went, people would just ask questions about, that felt really intrusive. And I really struggled with the bullying and all of those things. And yet I realized that for me, I just protected myself, right? I built a hard shell. If I was just really quiet and I had a hard shell and nobody could penetrate, then I would win. And I realized that when you kind of protect yourself by building this wall, it becomes impenetrable for you to exit either also. And so I had to really work through that. And Sheryl Sandberg actually called me out on this. I was at a meeting and I said something in front of the other executives. And she said, afterwards, she pulled me aside. She said, "You can stop fighting now. You've won." And she realized it wasn't about fighting for your rights. It was actually, I was just fighting everyone. And she's like,
Wow.
"You're fighting everyone around you. You need to back off." And it took me a long time to understand what she was saying, but it was so transformative to me because that fight was everything I had and I had to find a new identity. Well, what am I fighting for now? And so I had to really find a lot of grace in that. And I have over the years, but at the time that kind of that power of like being angry and upset at how I grew up was rocket fuel because it drove me to succeed, to be ambitious, to do all the things. And then suddenly it was starting to burn me up and it was starting to hurt my relationships. And I had to really retool and figure out where I wanted to go from there.
I'll share with you, when I was younger, I used to berate myself for a mistake, oftentimes a mistake that only I would notice, like mistakes that other people didn't even see. And being able to let that sort of thing go became necessary for me to be able to put myself out there and do certain things because you're going to screw up all the time in that context. And if you're an introvert, I think a lot of introverts are naturally kind of hard on themselves that way. So I could relate very much to this lesson because when someone asked me a while ago, it's like, hey, how were you? How did you have to evolve to put yourself out in public life? And I said, I just had to stop being so hard on myself.
That is absolutely true. I think so often we're the hardest on ourselves more than anybody else. I remember when, I was growing up, I was the one who said, I got a 99. What happened to the last point? My parents
Wasn't
actually.
Even your parents, Deb? Come on.
My parents actually,
the Asian parents.
My parents are actually way more laid back than you would expect
Really? That's
Asian
funny.
parents to be. They're like, why do you study so hard? But I had this internal drive when I was in third grade, I'm like, I'm going to graduate first in my class so I can get a scholarship to college. What third grader actually sits there and plots this?
Yeah, what third grader plots that?
But
I wish my third graders plotted that.
I wish a little bit of that too. But for me, it was my only escape from something I really, really struggled with.
This is rural South Carolina, right?
Yeah, it was a small town in South Carolina. It's about 45 minutes outside of Charleston. And, I just really struggled with what it was like to grow up being different. I said, I'm going to go to a place where I'm accepted. But in order to get there, I had to get to college. My parents could only help me so much. So I'm like, I'm going to graduate number one. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a scholarship and I'm never going to come back here. And so much of that is that rocket fuel I talked about, right? That drive to like break through every barrier. And that helped me until it no longer helps me. So I was a perfectionist and an introvert, which is, maybe two things that are too much compatible in some ways. And so I had to really let go of that, because in parenting in particular, there is no perfect. And they'll let you know when you're not perfect.
Hey YouTube, glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you really like it, hit subscribe, and then YouTube will notify you every time we have a bang up new guest. Thank you.